This morning, as we went through the little 4 or 5 points of seeing the qualities of the meditator or practitioner on the path of the practices. And so likewise, delving or going into the various commentaries that are there, it becomes necessary. More than these enumerated qualities that we discussed, there are many other qualities and then that need to be cultivated by anyone on the path of the practices. As in the general context and analogy of the vessels are given, vessel that is upturned, vessel that has a hole, vessel that is smeared with poison. Similarly, a mind that listens to the teachings or studies the teachings but is not able to retain it, again, doesn't benefit from the teachings. Even if one tries to hear it and keep it to some degree but then forgets about it, that's also not helpful. Neither is a mind that listens to the teachings but chooses to misconstrue the teachings and therefore use the teachings as a way of satisfying one's own arrogance or ego or delusions. Then again, the teachings, although very profound, do not penetrate and transform the mind. And so in that regard, what happens is eventually the meditator is unable to really progress on the path of the practices. Teachings as profound as they are, if they are not cultivated into one's own body, speech, and mind, then remains theoretical. And one may be a very devoted meditator or a practitioner, but in terms of the transcendence and complete dismantling, destruction of the rigidity of one's own stubbornness or ego grasping, that doesn't happen. And so no matter how much one is devoted to the path of the practices and the teachings in terms of pacifying, destroying, or decreasing the anger or ignorance, desire, that doesn't take place. And so it is essential, although some qualities as have been enumerated, the best way is to look into and see all the teachings that one has received, whether from Hinayana, Mahayana, or Vajrayana, Mandrayana teachings, Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings, and then see each word that as we read, how much do we actually contemplate upon it? How much research and examination have we done in that teaching? How much confidence is there in the mind? And working to develop that confidence until that longing confidence transforms into irreversible confidence, a confidence that is so very deeply embedded that arises as the perfect antidote to the inability to bring about the practices into daily life. So from that perspective, generating a strengthened examination becomes necessary. And that determination, motivation of really trusting one's own practices, being able to develop the confidence, the meaning of the practices, being essential, then we begin to practice and meditate in diverse ways, each of these methods of practices being essential, very, very profound in its own way. And so people who are doing Shamata Vipassana practices, then that's an entire practice in its own self. Likewise, whether it is Chenrezig practice or Guru Yoga practices or Vajrakilaya practice, Vajrasattva practices, each practice is a complete practice in its own way. And it is true if we look into any of the texts and the commentaries. Each commentary says this is the pith and the pinnacle of all the commentaries and it's the most profound. You look at any sadhana and it says you do not need to do anything more than that. This is the completeness of it. If you look at just the seed syllable, Om Mani Padme Hum, and the commentary on it, it says any meditator who recites this one is already liberated and doesn't need to do anything beyond that. And if you look at the essence of what is within that particular text, then it is true. There is nothing contradictory in it, in that it is absolutely profound. 6 seed syllables of the Mani, Om Mani Padme Hum, is the entire commentary on the 6 realms, the causes that lead to the 6 realms, the and pure nature of these 6 realms arising as the 6 Buddhas, what is it in its own essence. And so you could, and there is a whole tantra that you can compose on that 6 seed syllables. There's nothing that is there. Leave alone 6 seed syllables, you take just the word compassion, and then if we worked in that, we can go through the 84,000 tenets, essences within that simple word compassion. That is only out because of the mountain of stubbornness and the rigidity of our own views. That, as an answer to that, comes a mountain of commentaries and different kinds of instructions that are there. So each practice is complete. Each practice has that ability to remain within it. But then again, that mountain of hindrances, that we stubbornness, as I said, that comes about is because of this inability, let's say, to really see the essence of the practice that we are doing. For example, we introduce, let's say, Shamata to meditators, and even before you begin to practice Shamata completely, one is on a lookout for what Vipassana or when Vipassana will begin. And so you begin to look at what could be the next stage. You do Shamata, but you keep a lookout on not what you are doing, but you look at what Tonglen might be about, what Lojong might be about, what other subjects could be about. Then Vipassana as you give, then you look into Mahayana, you look into Vajrayana. If you're prostrating, you look at Yidam. If you're looking at Yidam, you look at Trekshö or Togel. If you're looking at Togel, you look at something else. And that is what happens. Every year we go through that same thing. We give the Manjushri practices in the beginning, and then you tell the person to go and do 100,000 of Manjushri. Next year, not much change in the form of one's own character and attitude has happened, but this person will come and say, I've done the 100,000 you told me to do. So the teacher is left with no choice but to give another practice. Do Guru Yoga 100,000 times. And so you go back and do Guru Yoga 100,000 times. Same person, not much change, but you finish the 100,000 Guru Yoga times, and then you look hungrily at the person and say, I finished the 100,000 times. Then you say 800,000 times of the Vajrasattva, and then that takes care for the next 1.5 years or so. But you finish 800,000 times of Vajrasattva, and then you look and say, what else can you do? Then we give the outer practice, then the inner practice, then the secret practice, hoping that in 20-25 years of doing hundreds and thousands of different mantras, transcendence of the person's attitude, suppleness of the mind, more flexibility of one's own rigid views, more kindness, more gentleness of that person is able to come about. And so that is then essential to see that each practice is about a complete practice, but we don't see the completeness in the practice, and we go more on the outer form of the practices, which is unfortunate. Not doing so, but whatever practice one is doing, going back into it with completeness, that becomes essential. So what is given in one part of this particular kabum of the text here of the Daklingpa and Lochen Dhamma is the essence, what is referred to as the essence of all the meditations. It is not necessary, it could be, but it is not necessary to take as a particular method of practice. In listening to it also, it would be unwise if you saw that as a new or a different way of putting things into practice, but it's a practice that could be integrated in any practice, whether it is mantra recitations, whether it is shamatha, whether it is vipassana, any vajrayana or mahayana practices. And then, most importantly, in every moment where one's mind is, every place where one is, if one were able to work with these practices, then again, that would be a bridging gap, or let's say a foundation on where mindfulness and awareness of everyday activities could be generated. So as the text says, Lama Rinpoche Tagi Nedun Shiwar Tzedusu, Tidi Tabar Tzedusu, Tingen Zin Chabar Jinju La Jiwar Tzedusu, Suatape, Lama Rangi Jiwa Ne Tempe, Leba Timugi Rang Yinjang Ne Taban Jayogi Kushimtar, Chiptotan Trawe Nangdo, Huichi, Chunjung Karbo, Tongkangi Nangdo, Lama Dang Rang Se Irme Ayi Karbo, Na Rang Hawala, Sale, Nyambar Yajing, Ayi Nijitsam, Shubur Debe, Ale Tuzin Chendan, the Saljin, Luigi Chinang, Kundu Pape, Tigdip Nedun Tamche, Na Chadang, Chö, Socha Cham, the Queen number Binji Temper, Ranglu Konden Shegongi Chibata, Samlas. It is simple. It is a simple method of integrating mindfulness in every moment, whatever activities you may be doing. If it is formal session of meditation that one wants to do, then one can do it during formal session of meditation. Otherwise, when walking, talking, or any other activities that one may be doing a simple mindfulness practice or an exercise, let's say, or a much more simple form method of bringing awareness can be done in whatever ways that most inspires a person. It could come from a mantra. It could come from reflecting upon a certain thought. May all sentient beings attain happiness, a simple thought, and then taking that as the cause or the seed of bringing the mind into awareness. That could be there. And as in some of the teachings, the teachers have talked about, when you hear a melodious song, immediately taking that melodious song as a way or as a hook that brings the mind back to awareness, really generating happiness at the sound of the sweet music, and hoping all sentient beings to have that same happiness that you are experiencing at that moment. If you see a beautiful flower at that moment, making an offering and allowing the mind to come back into mindfulness of generating some good wish to the other sentient beings. If you see a beautiful person, or if you see any person, being able to take that as the method of bringing the mind back to awareness of seeing, oh yes, such a thing that I am able to experience, may that be the experience of all the sentient beings. If it is negative, oh, this is really how the confusion and ignorance arises. May all sentient beings wake up to their own basic wisdom and be free from creating unnecessary unhappiness that everyone does not want. And so in that way, anything could be brought about into developing awareness, such as, again, what would be a simple method, as the text says here, is reflecting upon the kindness of one's own teacher. Is also one way of working with it. Within the Vajrayana tradition of teachings, one of the foremost practices is said to be Guru Yoga practices. And so, in that sense, Guru Yoga is not about being devoted to a particular guru as much as is learning to bring to mind someone that really inspires you to do something good. That's what the Guru principle is about. Is deities, as much as we try to work with them, is still working with something that we do not have that personal contact with as much as we have with our teachers. And therefore, that face that best inspires your mind to be grounded in basic awareness, that is the whole principle of Guru Yoga meditation. And so if in that case, then the Guru's face, or seeking the blessings of the Guru, or in that case, again, as the text says, a simple seed syllable that is then said to be the sound or the syllable that is united with all sounds. There are no sounds that do not originate from and therefore being able to sense or visualize as the text says, above one's head, if you want to visualize, or at the heart level, wherever you think is your mind. Sometimes people say mind, sometimes people say mind, and then again, not differentiating between that, wherever it is. Simply being able to rest the mind in the sense of, oh, this is the seed syllable that represents the very primordial nature of mind. Just as in every sound, there is the semblance of similarly, in every appearance, every phenomena, every thought, there is the brilliance of one's own mind, one's own natural wisdom mind. Therefore, are representing that one-pointedness, or are representing that natural wisdom of the mind as a reference, as a very subtle reference, and taking the mind into awareness. And so simply reflecting upon the and then sitting in meditation, or sense of visualizing the in the head or at the heart level while you are engaging in any activity, then that's also taking a reference point and being able to gain one-pointed concentration. This kind of a method of meditation, whether visualizing the teacher, visualizing the seed syllable, or whatever it may be, is a way of taking help of a reference point, deliberate as it is in this case. Nevertheless, for the distraction to be disciplined into a single-pointed concentration. So ordinarily, why we can't bring meditation into action is mind, although tries to be mindful, the passage or the pathway of our senses often bring about distraction. So the seeing, and there's a cultivation of judgment or mind or opinions that is driven by what we see. Similarly, sound, again, and direction, deviation of the concentration to the sound that we hear goes in another direction. Thoughts goes in another direction, what we feel goes in another direction. So the web pattern of our mental consciousness is in so many ways diverted that semblance of one-pointed concentration not being there, the awareness gets impeded and gets obstructed. Therefore, it is essential to bring about, to gather the mind in one. It's almost as having 5 children versus 1 child. And it is much more easier to look after that 1 child than to have quintuplets. And so in that way, it's the same simple method of being able to see. The easierness is to first gather the pathways of the senses, the 5 senses, into a single-pointed concentration, so that becomes the method or the reference of the field of awareness or the ground of awareness. And so again, the text says if a person, one may do so in this particular way, especially if one is more spiritually inclined, then gathering the inspiration, you can dissolve the Guru into your heart and generate light and luminosity that permeates in the 10 directions, and whomever this light touches is benefits or generates happiness and causes of happiness. Then that's again for the people who are more into the elaborate sense of visualization. For some, it is very inspirational. You can do that. Those who have some aversion to such inspirations, then just simplifying that and then remaining with the R without elaborating too much on it, as you like. Meditation should be seen as it is. It is not about the form of meditation and then working with it as much as is taking the form and then benefiting from that form of meditation to best inspire one's own self. That's how it should be. And so it is essential to work with each meditation and to allow the meditation to become the genuine ground of inspiration to come back to generating the essential essences of the teachings. Niba shatab ngala thomar chiwar din yit lama toji changla so baso lune la ni kutur pimo la kabnun da jebe nangi chudun chawe ngane nyaji da zaji la chimchane dobor hloji chuso parchungze la chuje zumeber lungchong so somar jobani nga rambab make langboche changi sewa dar hede khanla chenji mebe ngane so. And so in the beginning initial stages one may take such a reference as the R syllable or the Guru's visualization in gaining one-pointed concentration, gradually allowing the mind to not refer to even a single reference. Even if it is R syllable, for example, it is briefly bringing the R syllable but not retaining it all the time, but it allowing to become the pause or becoming the cause of that single concentration, then let the R also dissolve without holding to the visual appearance of the R and yet being able to hold the ground of awareness in activities. And so two brief situations. One in the beginning stages would be, let's say if you are walking somewhere or working in different situations, being able to have some visual idea of the R, holding the mind there as you walk or as you are doing some action, but sense of, oh, the R syllable is here or here, holding on to it. Gradually means after a few sessions of such this, then making it even far more simple is that you have a sense of R and then drop even that sense of R after that. So bringing the R as the cause of awareness, and then after that, neither to the visual appearance of the teacher nor the visual appearance of the R, simply letting it be and then being able to have a much more pervasive sense of awareness without any reference, so to speak. Being able to remain in that is essential. However, if meditators often find it difficult to integrate that into activity, daily life, then it is maybe necessary that you do take it into first practicing on the cushion and then familiarizing yourself with it and then going into taking it or integrating it into daily activities. In that case, as the text says, sitting down in a comfortable position of meditation is essential, whether it is the discipline of 7 points of Vajravirotana posture or any posture that allows the semblance of oneself in meditation. That's essential. Technically, one would suggest that you do keep and assume a meditation posture. As the text says, placing both the palms on your knees, sitting in a straight posture is the meditation, simple meditation posture. But at the same time, do what is comfortable to you, so that the concentration is not so much on the body as much as is in the essence of what you are supposed to be establishing here. However, there are some times when people are too relaxed with their body. That doesn't say much about the confidence and what you are trying to do. It's when you sit and practice and meditate, what you're trying to do is benefit all sentient beings and liberate all sentient beings. But if there is the indiscipline of the body to begin with, then that doesn't go very well with the big commitment that you are trying to make over here about completely letting go of self and self-grasping. So that's something that one can think about. However, what is essential here is to do train to bring about some awareness and discipline at the same time. And in the context of what we are talking about, many oftentimes within Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings, one talks about natural resting of the mind. And so sometimes we refer to it as resting in the nature of suchness. Some refer to it as abiding in the natural ease or being able to remain within the Rigpa essence. And so different names have been given to it. It can be taught in different ways. What we are going into is the simple presentation of resting in the natural ease, so that that natural ease, which is the very intrinsic nature, may be able to be taken into every moment or every activity. So as I was saying, in the case that one is not able, although as simple as it is, yet due to our own habitual tendencies, if we find it difficult to integrate it or become familiar with it, then one may begin by sitting in meditation, covering or sitting straight as the spine is straight, allowing the hands to simply rest in a very simple meditation posture. Whatever you may be familiar with, here it says covering your kneecaps or knees with both the palms, your fingers flowing downwards to the earth, allowing oneself to sit straight. And mainly here is, as in most meditations, training with one's own eyes. The eyes that we have, although each senses, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the body, and the mind, being constantly in movement. Nevertheless, in certain conditions, eyes and the heart, or the mind as we say, is said to be very subtly connected. And therefore, visual training or training in the gazes or the eyes often enables a meditator to gain pervasiveness, awareness, as well as one-pointed concentration, samadhi or meditation. Allowing the body to rest in a relaxed meditation posture, allowing the speech to be trained by gently placing one's upper and lower lips slightly closed together, not tightly closed nor open, but gently lift, sort of barely touching one another, and going through natural breathing. There is no specific breathing exercises given here. You can, if you are familiar with watching the breath, integrate watching the breath if that is helpful. But in this case, it's simply allowing the natural ease of the speech to be there in the form of normal breathing. Subtle in-breath and the out-breath, a pace that you can train in making the inhalation, exhalation even, but a natural breathing is then disciplining the speech. Allowing the eyes, gazes of, or the eyes as we were saying, to remain in its very natural ease. As much as possible, beginning meditation with open eyes. That is, again, always more favorable. Now the text talks about the gazes of the eyes being similar to a drunken elephant. Now, I don't know how many people have seen a drunken elephant, but drunken elephant's eyes is often referred to as lowered gaze that is not seeing anything specific at this point. It's a question of being able, it's simply resting the eyes where there is a pervasiveness of view. At this point, for example, being able to see all of you and yet not seeing one thing specifically. It's being able to see everything, but at the same time not having a formulated reference at that moment of what it is that you are looking at. Distinction between the two gazes would be is if I look and then I see the video camera over here, and the other would be is when I look and I don't see anything specific, but I see everything at this moment. Being able to see the pervasive, see everything and yet nothing specifically at this point, and then that being one. And the second is eyes that are lowered between the upper part of the room and lower part of the room. Lower part of the room is what I am looking at. These are then the two stances that one can begin with. Allowing the mind to completely also remain in relaxation or in complete openness. Complete relaxation and openness would be neither have thoughts of the past, not future planning, nor grasp to any thought at the present moment. Whether it is through Shamata meditation. If you're familiar with Shamata meditation, just as you would label thoughts or just as you would reflect upon noticing a thought and not grasp to the thought, remaining within the non-grasping to the thought, you could simply take that instruction to heart. If one is familiar with Vipassana and analytical meditation, then you have done 3 stages of investigation. If you investigate the nature of thoughts, all of us understand that thoughts do not exist independently. We know that thoughts have no point of origin. We know that thoughts, as they abide, don't have any existence, independent reality. We also know that the thoughts do not cease into being or dissolving into any particular path. So thoughts are empty in nature. Analytical meditation, if you're familiar with that, then taking that as the method of investigation, whatever different ways one is familiar with, the essence of relaxing into the mind is not following into or not following any thought. If a thought does arise, simply let it be, without your interfering with it, without your manipulating it, without your giving it a name, without trying to designate it, without trying to any kind of grasping or holding tendencies to it. If a thought arises, let it be, and then let it seemingly, whatever happens to it, just as a burst of smoke dissolves into space. Likewise, any thought that you don't grasp to doesn't have any itself the power of production and reproduction. Therefore, allowing the mind to completely rest within that gaze without any particular formed thought in one's own mind, allow it to remain as long as possible. Remaining within this is essential, as the text says. Maybe it's our Rambab Sumla Dilne Kanla Chenzi Meber Teme to Chedi Number Joso, Yalala, Bocho the Bodun Nile, Tambola, Tenje Temela Labani, Tambola Tenje Toman Yamjada Tumbashiso. Now, again, if one finds it difficult in the beginning to go into relaxation of the mind so that there is no formation of thought, then that indicates that the mind still struggles with not being able to gain one-pointed concentration. So thoughts and liberating thoughts, so thoughts and not grasping to thoughts, allowing the mind to remain in that expansiveness. If it encounters difficulties, that most probably does so because the senses are still continually dispersed in different directions and the awareness concentration is diverted in many ways. It is at this time that a meditator should realize, as the text says, the necessity to strengthen Shamata meditation. And Shamata meditation, as is often indicated, is to truly enhance one's own one-pointed samadhi through various methods. And many of us are familiar with Tenje and Temegi Lapa, or Shamata with support and Shamata without support. And so visualization of deities, for example, or resting the mind in the visual appearance of any structure, any form, is often said to be the samadhi with support. If it is, again, formlessness, breath, and then again out breath and remaining within the dissolution of the breath into the outer space, or the dissolution of the deity into one's own intrinsic nature and remaining within that completion phase, or analytical meditation and remaining within the empty nature, all of these are then gaining shamatha without support, or trying to or being able to establish one-pointed concentration without support. All of these different techniques can be cultivated according to what one feels. It is not about, certain times meditators think, if I am meditating with a certain support, and as the text says, you can take on any support. You can take on the support of looking at a statue of a Buddha or a seed syllable or a visualization. That all the supports that we are taking into meditation does not necessarily indicate oneself to be a beginner on the path of the practices. As many meditators do, we think formless, because it's formless, it talks a lot more about advanced stages of meditation. In some ways, that is given as the, let's say, much more superior method of meditating. But on the other hand, what we need to do as meditators is to understand the given moment and the circumstance we have at this moment. Even if you are adept at resting the mind without any form, nevertheless, certain times our emotions and the upheaval of the emotions happen to be very strong, where emptiness may not be the best method of resting simply because we haven't gained the confidence of recognizing the empty nature. At such moments, taking on form meditation may be the best way of resting the mind. And therefore, in that moment, viewing or seeing a seed syllable, visualizing a certain form of the deity, looking at the picture of a teacher, looking at the pictures of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, sitting in front of the shrine with your mind placed on the support of the statue of the Buddha, or any such, may be actually more effective in calming the mind into a one-pointed concentration than a who would fail to really rest the mind in calmness, because one doesn't want to do form meditation, wants to do formless meditation. Not being unwise about such a thing is then essential. Form meditation, as the text says here, Tenje la Thomar Nyamja da Tumbashi, Pardo Jingu Sawasum, Tama Jetop Dandawashi, Tambo, Rambab Jingane, Pumba Tabungobo, Rapa Chikta down there. In terms of gradual progression, the beginning, especially those who are beginning on the path of the meditation, is to take any object that can be the point of concentration. If one is inspired by spiritual objects, then Thangkas, statues, pictures of teachers, deities, these can all be taken. Again, if a person has difficulty, here it is not about what you would concentrate upon as much as is concentrating. That is the most important thing. And so as the text says, you can take vases and pillars and flowers and pots and pans and whatever it is that you might want to take as that object of concentration. Seeing, looking at it, and resting the mind on the object is the very simple beginner's way of looking at object meditation. What is most essential to understand is that you rest the mind on the object, not the viewing of the object, as much as if you're looking at a certain object, a vase, for example. Mind should rest on the object. That allows the one-pointed concentration to come about. Gradually, that can progress into taking a smaller object, a small stone, a small pebble, a small tip. For example, in the beginning, if you were to look at this whole object here, then gradually progressing into just resting on the tip of this would be progressing it into a much more smaller object, which would then be the focus of one's own awareness. Chilbui karsal tabula tenwatas, rizetabi taring tara kangruan lapate hiuso. Third stage is then said to be where one trains in the different ways of concentrating and yet not losing the single-pointed concentration, is where one clearly looks at a cluster of things. And so in the beginning would be one object. Second stage would be a very subtle object. Third would be where you're looking at a cluster of things or a group of things with the same kind of concentration. Fourthly, something that is at a very long distance away from you, such as the peak of a mountain, as the text says. 4 different objects that have been enumerated to just train the mind to gain single-pointed concentration in different variations. Things that are very far away, things that are grouped together in clusters, things that are very tiny and looking at only a very tiny fraction of it, and things that are quite big and apparent, larger objects that are closely placed in one's own self, covering, and many more different methods you can apply to yourself, which would train the mind to be detailed and pervasive, both at the same time, simultaneously. When the detail and the pervasiveness is something that we are not able to really develop, that often brings about the difficulty where we keep thinking that if I am careful and develop mindfulness, I cannot be mindful of everything that's happening in the environment. If I am more pervasive and resting, then I cannot be detailed. We often have this conflict where we think if I am in meditation, then I can't respond to what I am being asked. And if I'm responding to what I'm being asked, then I lose my mindfulness and awareness. Shouldn't happen, doesn't happen. Nevertheless, we do think that that is what is happening. On the other hand, when we meditate and slight sounds or different kinds of movement happens, we immediately become very distracted. That creates anger, that creates irritation, that creates, again, distraction from whatever you are meditating upon. And that's one of the reasons why even in meditation, for example, a very strange thing that happens, especially in the West, I think, is where the environment of meditation becomes very sedentary in many ways. And that is where children are not allowed, or animals are not allowed, people are not allowed to move around, and so on and so forth. So many restrictions that we put about. And then sometimes we have to wonder and say, however are we going to go out and bring mindfulness in daily activities when in terms of even the slightest movement in the shrine room, everyone goes, and there are dirty looks that one gives to one another in terms of how can you disturb me and so forth. And so that again is the same thing that we bring into our meditation, is a kind of belief that the reason why I can't integrate awareness and mindfulness in my daily activities is because that requires a lot of concentration. And if I am concentrating on generating the awareness, then again, I can't respond. If I respond, I get diverted. I get again back into my own emotions and displays of the ego-grasping mind. And so in order to train that object meditation, is very helpful. It trains the mind to, as Padmasambhava talks in his teachings, about precision and expansiveness simultaneously happening at the same time. That there is a precision of the details of watching every action of your body, speech, and mind. Every detail is carefully intertwined, united with awareness. And yet, within that detailed precision of awareness, one does not lose ground of the pervasive view of the absolute true nature. Mind resting within its own inner nature, whether you call it primordial wisdom or Buddha nature, while the mind rests within the pervasiveness of the view, yet it is precise in being able to perform all its responsibilities with detail, with mindfulness, and that then arises from the simple method, as the texts have said, training in the visual Shamata or support Shamata as the in different perspectives. That then is the ground which trains the mind of a meditator. Bardo, Jungyo Chensum Sawani, Sheba Jinshin Timna Tadan Jenla Dösong. In terms of practicing the object meditation, as we just enumerated, if again meditators encounters difficulties or distractions, mainly in meditation, two kinds of distractions are what we often encounter. One is drowsiness and one is outer distraction. And so if there are these distractions, especially if it is inner distractions of drowsiness, laziness, and the one-pointed concentration while resting the mind begins to have much more sense of sleep and stupor in it, then the effective antidote, as many are familiar with, is to raise the gaze and to look highwards, skywards, or upper gaze is the effective antidote. Likewise, if the mind seems to gather more momentum in distraction and many thoughts occur and the distraction occurs due to sounds or appearances of forms, then again allowing the gaze to go downwards and really looking completely down about a foot away from where you are sitting. Downward gaze allows the mind to be more trained in single-pointed concentration and not be so distracted by outer circumstances. Then again, if there seems to be a simple distraction, alternately sometimes stupor, sometimes distraction, then a direct gaze, sitting and then looking directly in front of you. These are the three different kinds of gazes that are enumerated in most meditations that then is very effective. And so listening to the way you are meditating, being able to see yourself, being able to listen to the different stages that the mind goes through, and then developing the antidote, let's say, or the remedy through the gazes, trains also the mind to remain in single-pointed concentration and be free from the distractions of outer and inner circumstances. Ngopo khangrung ki ten de sheba chimlo renjok tul haba da sumo song. Jetop dan rawa shini sherning tabo don jangwa denjing rambap sum dan sete song. Gradually, then again, as a way of progressively training in different ways, then another way of training, as the text is, taking sound into meditation. This was more form into meditation, training the mind through form. Training the mind through form, through sound, is then again said to be in the beginning where the mind connects to different sounds. For example, Shening Tabi Dojangwa, or recitation of sutras, or even chants, and different kinds of supplications or sounds of the instruments, religious instruments being played. Any sound that in the beginning, although it is deliberate, although it is discriminatory, nevertheless, there are certain sounds that we feel more inspired by. This doesn't have to be religious sounds of Buddhist tradition. It could be Gregorian chants, for example, or it could be just piano recitals of Mozart, or whatever it is that best influences or inspires the mind to take that sound as the object of concentration. This concentration is much more subtle than form, and therefore training in the sound is so that later on in any activity, sound becomes a mode of awareness rather than distraction. So in the beginning, as the text says, any sutra recitation, any kind of aspirations or chants, and meditating and allowing the mind to mingle with the chants. So when you hear the sound, allowing the concentration just as it was in the appearance of the object, taking the sound and mingling the awareness with the sound and remaining within it, however, without opinion or a judgment. Good, bad, and the enormous amount of mental chatter that we have of trying to discern the goodness and the badness of the sound, or following the notes of the sound, or trying to analyze it, trying to give judgments and opinions about it. Those are not necessary. There's a simple sense of sound and the pleasantness of the sound, and remaining just within that ease or the natural ease of this hearing of the sound is one way of training. Then again, progressively going into yourself reciting something and remaining within the recitation, allowing the pathways of all the concentrations to simply come into that recitation. You may not even know what you are reciting. If you know, that's also fine. But here the point is saying something simple, such as Om Ahum, if you don't know any other mantras, or it could be even Om, or it could be even Ah, or it could also be ABCD if nothing else. The thing is that there is a recitation that you are doing and allowing the different diverse senses and the senses pathways to join in the sound. So it's not in what you are saying, but in the sound that you are making, and allowing that sound to become the basis of awareness, of concentration. So that if you're saying Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, then in that recitation itself, concentrating so that there is a single point in concentration aware of the recitation and the sound that is arising from your speech. Rangitam Galchung Mawa. Then gradually go into concentration that is single-pointedly there in idle conversations that you are having. Learn to listen to yourself. That's what simple it is. You may be talking to someone else, whether it's over the telephone, whether it's in conversation, but part of your mind training in listening to what you are saying, so that it's not only saying something, concentrating outwardly, but while you are saying something, listening to the sound that you are making, so that the mind is completely immersed in that speech that you are making, or the words that you are speaking. For this, then, when you remain within one point in concentration in the sound that is made by the others, when others are speaking, then allowing your mind to rest completely, one-pointedly concentrating in the sound that you hear from the others. And this could be in a park or any other place where you sit and you hear many people discussing or many people talking to one another, without any objective opinion being formed at that moment, not listening to the meaning of the words, but a sense of the sound that is arising from many directions. That could be simply sitting in here and hearing the movement of the cars, and therefore that making a sound, allowing that to be again the ground of awareness, so that one-pointed concentration arises from sound. Single-pointed concentration, single-pointed awareness comes from the sound of the others speaking with one another, arises from the speech that you are making, arises from the recitations of mantras that you are doing, arises from the chants of the different chants or the recitations of prayers that are being done, arises from music, arises from any kind of sound, taking sound as the basis from where one-pointed concentration can arise. That is then again one way of working with sound. So basically, most of our everyday activities are going to be around physically seeing things and forming objective things in the case of our body in movement. And then other thing is mainly we are going to be working with sound. And when we say I cannot maintain mindfulness, we are going to blame either forms that arises as the cause, or we are going to blame sound as the causes of distraction. This is then working with those things that we think are going to be distractions that allows the mind to be more concentrated. Third way of then training, again, is said to be in this way. First is then in gaining concentration, one-pointed concentration, taking the environment into consideration. And so, whichever place it may be, beginning with a comfortable place. A garden, if that is what you like, a shrine room, if that is what you like. Your bed could also be something that you like very much as a place of resting, or it could be a beautiful church or a monastery or a place wherever one finds comfort, peacefulness, quietness. That best inspires the mind to immediately attune itself into some kind of serenity, some kind of awareness. And so here, as the text says, in any comfortable place, sitting and allowing the environment to become the basis of awareness. Basis of awareness would be is where there is no other distraction but a sense of this is good, and then remaining within the pleasure or the joyfulness or the happiness, the comfort of the environment that you are in, and then allowing that to be the basis. Basis of awareness becomes when there is no more further chatter from you about describing the place, explaining and expanding on the place. Mental thoughts and continuity of a mental process, judging and criticizing or complimenting that place need not be done. It's simply just as you would sit in a comfortable chair, and that's what all you need to do, is to just be able to rest within the comfort that you experience at that moment. That's the first basic way of working with it. Then again, different activities such as cleaning things, whether it is showering, whether it is cleaning your face, brushing your teeth, any activity of cleaning that comes about is then again integrating that as the awareness. That's the cleaning process. This is just being cleaned, or this is being cleaned, and simply training the mind to take that cleaning, if you like, you can use the word purifying here. If you're more spiritually inclined, then we can say purifying aspect, and remaining within the awareness of the activity that one is doing at that moment. And so as the text, in some of the further elaborated texts, one talks about even in the sense of blowing your nose, being able to take that as point of awareness. Even if it is sneezing, taking that as the point of awareness. Any activity that is of cleaning, that could be going to the bathroom, that could be sweeping the floor, that could be cleaning any surface. Any activity that has cleaning quality to it, allowing that to be the point of reference, of bringing the mind into resting within that activity, within that moment, is another way of doing it. Then the third is then said to be when going to sleep, when eating, or when drinking, allowing the one-pointed concentration to be completely there within that activity. In sleeping, simply rest within the pervasiveness of the mind that sleeps. And so this is sleeping, and that's where it should simply rest in its most natural way. In eating something too, as you put the food in your mouth, there's a sense of, I am eating, and within that recognition of eating, allowing the mind to rest in observation of that action of eating. Likewise, when you are drinking, simply, oh, I am drinking, and then letting the mind remain within the awareness of the drinking, allowing that simple gesture, simple action to become the ground basis for the awareness to gain its natural ease. That is then again working with the three different kinds of actions of the body that can become ground of awareness. Rambab nam sumjinga ne pensam ji parnang tombe jiltang hede shagla yulpaga ne yobar meje so. Gradually, as one goes through these different processes, these different stages are said to be relying on support. Having then done these practices, or if one thinks one doesn't need these support, then one can go into simply taking on, generating natural ease of one's own body, speech, and mind through the resting of the mind without support. Without support simply would be is resting in meditation or any comfortable position as you are in, allowing the concentration to go to the central of one's own forehead. That would be simply the point between the two eyebrows. In the beginning, it's a simple way of taking your concentration here. Some sense of visually looking here, mind also looking over here. And as the point of concentration becomes very strong or very concentrated in the center of the forehead, then from this concentration onwards, immediately take the awareness much more expansive outwardly towards the sky, as we often say. In some cases, looking at the blueness of the sky can also be helpful. And then in some ways, it's not even necessary to have the sense of blueness of the sky. Sky or space is much more a pervasive quality. Just as a skillful archer would then pull the bow and dart the arrow, and the arrow would shoot into the space. Wherever it hits into the space directly, doesn't hesitate and go here and there. Similarly, here too, taking the same analogy is concentrating here and then allowing the awareness to shoot outwardly into whatever expanse that one can go into. If it's the blueness of the sky or into the directness of the space. So a simple thing would be is my sitting here and allowing the awareness to go here, and from that shoot completely directly outward, and wherever it seems to be, allowing the mind to rest at that point where the focus shifts to. And so whether into the blue sky or whether into any other expansiveness, beginning simply with a simple thing. It could be that your awareness or the concentration could shoot outward and remain somewhere in the middle, and the space that you would cover with your concentration could be just a palmful. If you keep your palm in space and you remove your palm, just as much as space would be covered by your palm, you could remain within that much concentration. Gradually, you could increase it by, let's take, in many cases, the text talks about shield. You know the shield when you go to war, as big as the span of a shield. Then you could take it as big as a roof. You could take it as big as a mountain, gradually increasing it so that it is as expansive as a space, that the mind is able to rest in one-pointed concentration within the expansiveness of the space. If in the beginning space becomes too abstract and too very big, start with a palmful of space. Then start with a shield full of space. Then start with a space as big as is a house, or that would be covered by a mountain. Gradually, as then one can increase, remaining in the natural expanse of the space without any deviation, movement, remaining there is essential. Yul Pagana Yogar Meche, essential points to contemplate and remember is not to analyze space, not to analyze the object that you are focusing upon. Whether in space or sky, as you are remaining within it, not to analyze or interpret, designate or expand, express what it is, not have any judgments or opinions about it. Likewise, especially for object meditation, if it is sound or activity or different kinds of forms that you are looking at, point is not to elaborate on the object of meditation. If you are going to elaborate, that's going to immediately cause a distraction. Therefore, rest, but not to elaborate on the object of meditation is essential. Neither should one look inward to see, how am I looking? Am I concentrating? Am I doing it in a certain way? Not to investigate the one who is searching, that is also essential. Without allowing the mind to elaborate on neither the subject nor the object nor the action itself, is the main focus of being able to train in the what is known as the natural abiding or natural ease of the mind. So these are some sense of tools or effective tools or methods of training in the basic quality of being sharp and aware and expansive at the same time. It's sharpness and clarity, pinpointing to the details, precision, that usually progresses into being mindful. Mindful of what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're doing. Mindfulness brings about much more easier potential of abandoning unvirtuous actions. Mindfulness brings about watching and being able to seize opportunities of generating positive qualities. Whether in Mahayana teachings also, same, the precision of the wakeful mind or the mindfulness allows oneself to progress on generating patience, kindness, loving kindness, generosity, compassion, and refrains from anger and negativities and different kinds of negative tendencies. In the sense of being able to also progress in resting within the emptiness, luminosity nature of the mind too, precision allows the brilliance of the luminous nature of mind to be there. Just as much the expansiveness generates the understanding of the empty nature of phenomena of self. And so it's a simple method from form as well as in formless that does become a possibility to integrate in any meditation. You can be a Vajrayana meditator and do this meditation, Mahayana and do this meditation. Person could not have understood or be formally a Buddhist meditator and yet do this meditation. Space is not copyrighted. None of the objects are copyrighted. Space doesn't belong to any particular lineage, is not the property of any teacher. So I think we are safe in that context here. So in that way, being able to simply train body, speech, and mind with relation to all the different kinds of objects that are there, that are in our normal life, daily life, that does tend to become distractive to a mind that is not trained in meditation. So you can integrate it in meditation, and as you would do it in meditation, integrate it also with daily activities. While walking, being able to take that into practice. While sitting, being able to take that into practice. Any brief moments or pauses that one has, either using the object or using the sound, and if possible, then simply resting with the expansiveness of space. Especially the part where of the formless space, or the formless, resting the mind in formless space or space itself, that becomes very essential. And so training first in the smallness and then gradually expanding to it, so that without any elaboration, one trains in the pervasiveness of everything that is happening. So when that is a practice that one trains in and gains much more familiarity within, then samadhi becomes very, very pervasive. Meditation becomes very pervasive. You can say the many things that you have to say and do the many things that you have to do, think the many thoughts that you have to think about, and yet not get so caught up in it that the wisdom of discerning between right and wrong is completely sort of drowned in this chatter of the sounds and in the activities of the body and the different thoughts of kinds of mental patterns that are there. So to train the mind to be the basis of awareness, these are some of the effective methods that can be cultivated. So try them. It's useful sometimes. So I think I will stop with the text here and then conclude here by really expressing thank you and gratefulness to many of you. And especially it was very nice meeting with several of the older friends who have been practicing very well and studying very hard, and that especially those of you whom I met last evening. And it was also of a particular joy to be able to meet with many of the students of Chogyam Rinpoche, Tsogni Rinpoche, Choling Rinpoche, and Mingyur Rinpoche, who's coming, I hear, very soon. And of course, of the other traditions, various other traditions, Tibetan Buddhist as well as other traditions, who all seem to be practicing in harmony, and that's all very good. I think one of the good sides of California has been that it's has diverse ways, and people talk about diversity. There are good sides to it and bad sides to it. One side is that spiritual materialism is always a big concern. But on the other hand, if there is genuine harmony, and you can do and pick up the best of all the different teachings that are there and work with that in accordance to however one feels most connected to, that's very good. With that, again, one thing that comes about is some tend to pick and choose many different things and get lost, ultimately get lost and not have found one particular way or path of practice. That's not good. I think whatever path of practice that you have chosen to do, for example, I am a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, and that will remain who I am. That will be my main practice. But then it is absolutely wrong that I would not appreciate other traditions of the practices, especially when it comes to criticism. Criticizing something that you don't know, that we tend to do all the time, that's very wrong. And therefore, it's good to learn about it. That makes you less hostile towards the others. And it also better makes your own understanding of whatever path of practice you are on in a way of saying, oh yes, this is true, this is true, this is good. And that's how one's own practice becomes much more strong. And so you remain sincere to the path of practice, the lineage that you are practicing on, but also keep a much more expansive view of how you can make better what you are doing by learning other things from other traditions. That's, I think, very good. And you've all had that. California has always had that advantage. And that's very, very good. And so, particularly here, the Jetsun Rinpoche students who have worked very hard in making this a wonderful place of practice. And I hear it was a funeral home before, but doesn't look like it at all. Sometimes, yes, the doors and the windows we can now see. If when someone tells me, then I could probably see that. But what they've done is a very good job of making it into a very sacred shrine room, and that's very nice. But no matter how good it is, the best thing always is when a lot of people do good practice in that environment. That's always very good, and I hope that continues. And many, many students of Chogyam Rinpoche, especially Karen, who has worked very, very hard. And as I was joking with her this morning and said, of the 2 days that we have been here, she's been probably driving for the last 24 hours all around. Thank you very, very much. All of us had one of the most interesting visits, very good visit. Interesting in a very nice way. I've got a different perspective of what happens in California Dharma centers, And so that's very nice to see that many people from different traditions come and practice together, live in harmony, I think. And that's always very, very good to see. And I hope that that increases, that continues to be so. And as much as possible, then do integrate meditation into daily life. Practice well, practice sincerely. Life continues to move, and we move closer and closer to death and impermanence. And many things we make very important and essential to ourselves. Whose lineage, which teacher, which practice, which method, which study, which view, which doctrine, which philosophy. Ultimately, none of these things actually are going to be that very essential. It will all come down to what kind of karma we are creating. What do we tend to do every day? From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. What are the actions that I accumulate? And so, no matter how good and devoted a student of meditation we may be, if awareness in one's own actions of the body, speech, and mind are not brought about, much of everything we say becomes intellectual and theoretical. And towards the end of our life, there isn't going to be a lot of death to whom we can explain whys and reasons, come out with reasons why we said the things we did, why we did the things we did, and the thoughts that we had made. So no amount of bribing, no amount of pacifying, no amount of flattery will actually enable that time to give us another chance. So it's better at this moment, living moment, to treasure the awareness, the body, speech, and mind that one has to make it truly useful for oneself and for the other sentient beings. And so hope and aspire to liberate all sentient beings. But the least one can do is to stay out of trouble too.